suit and tie and get your hair cut way up high. Get yourself a lawyer, son. You're gonna need a real good one.
Always makes me laugh. Makes me laugh a lot whenever I hear that. I do hope it makes you laugh too. It is my cherished wish that you get some joy from the fact that Tex Perkins comes in and takes over and introduces to you your talkback lawyer. He's been doing it for around 132 years and he continues. David Whiting, Melbourne solicitor, taking your calls, 1300 222 774. David, it's not Happy New Year. We got to catch up and speak during the bushfire disaster. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we talked about some bushfire-related issues.
We did.
And you're most welcome to bring them to us today if you have anything regarding insurance or rebuilding or liability. Please call in because David is the full bottle on that. But you've got a couple of quick, really fascinating issues to run through first of all while we get the calls up. One of them relates to quite incredible hail damage yesterday.
Well, I got a phone call from a friend in Canberra yesterday.
Oh, Canberra.
Where the hail damage was significantly worse than ours.
You're a master of understatement. You know that, don't you? I mean, it's elegant. I do like your
okay.
But at the same time, it was outrageous what happened in Canberra yesterday.
Well, this lady had a rent-a-car and the windows were broken, the car was full of water and all of the panels were damaged. The question is, whose problem is it? Answer, under the terms of I looked at two of the majors, it's the problem of the renter.
You're kidding me.
No, it's the problem of the renter.
How?
Flood and hail. Well, you're minding my car. I'm the owner of the car. I'm the rent-a-car company. You're minding my car. You're responsible for keeping it in good condition.
I'll push off.
That's exactly what they both say, push off.
I would tell the rental company something worse than push
Remember,
off.
they have access to your credit card.
I don't care. That's ridiculous. No, come on. If I'm driving down the Westgate...
Virginia, I agree with you. It's ridiculous, but that's what the policies say.
Please allow me to vent.
Yes, sorry, ma'am.
Seriously? So what's this guy going to have to do?
Well, she either pays the $5,500, which is
My apology,
the excess under the policy, or it's interesting that most credit cards, not all, but most credit cards have have an insurance element in them, and they will pay the excess on the rent-a-car.
The credit card company.
So if rent-a-car companies require you to give them a credit card.
Oh yes,
that's the way they want to get paid.
I know. I've handed it over many times.
Okay. Well, that's the way they want to get paid.
Yep.
And if you look at the terms and conditions that nobody ever looks at on a credit card, you will see that some cards, but not all, will have a free insurance in it. And part of the free insurance for some of the cards is to pay the excess on your rent-a-car insurance policy.
I just think it's ridiculous that a weather event that I can't control when I am driving something that is by definition exposed to the elements would then be my fault. I didn't have a crash. Something came crashing at me out of the sky.
It's not your fault, but you're now responsible for it.
Oh. I'd look forward to having the fight about that. In fact, I'd take that one to court.
Oh, would you really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, I would.
Okay.
Stick it out my glass jaw here.
Mm-hmm.
I read in the paper today that a number of high-profile law firms are now having to deal with the highly embarrassing reality that they may have underpaid their law graduates.
It's a game we play.
Oh, is it?
Who
gets to enjoy this game?
There was a time when lawyers... for a short period of time, lawyers were on an award. Now, if you are an admitted lawyer, so you have a practicing certificate authorising you to act as a lawyer in Victoria, you're not on an award. So you can agree on any amount of pay and work any amount of hours. But if you are a support staff person or a paralegal or a trainee lawyer, a graduate who's not admitted to practice, you're covered by an award. And we know that just about every fee earner in a law firm fills out a timesheet. And most of them need to account for 8 hours a day. So they're the people who are covered by the award. They're the people who are getting the adjustments to their pay for working overtime. But there's no doubt a significant number of admitted lawyers out there who are not getting paid there over time. So if you look at the Banking Royal Commission, Commissioner Hayne ran a very, very aggressive commission, and there were lots of lawyers working 16, 18 hours a day and working 7 days a week to meet the requirements of the commission, to meet their clients' requirements as a result of the commission. But it will only be the law graduates and the paralegals who are getting the extra money. So it's actually worse than it's the tip of the iceberg.
Wow, yeah, really.
And I'm actually amazed to see there are some law firms that say nothing to see here. We've checked and everybody's fine.
And you know that's not the case.
Well, I think there are lots of lawyers who work lots of hours. But they're not covered by an award. They were in the award for a while, then they took them out.
And your final story for us today?
The final story was an article I saw yesterday in the Financial Review, and again it was in the Age today, a similar article. And it talks about the sports grants that Bridget McKenzie was the sports minister, and
yes.
something like 3/4 of the grants were chosen on a criteria other than the criteria from the Sports Commission. And the question that's posed in the articles is whether that's constitutional. So what's the head of power pursuant to which the Commonwealth Government makes grants of this kind? And there's also some suggestions into pork barrelling. So they're really interesting articles about the issue. So well, I think it will go a lot further. Remember, we had some concerns a few years ago, I think it was 4 years ago, in relation to chaplaincy and whether the Commonwealth Government had the right to fund chaplains.
Yes, I do recall,
and they came along and the High Court said, I'm really very sorry, but there's no authority for you to spend that money on these things. Therefore, no. Somebody could do it for sports grants.
Well, even if you don't take it as high as a constitutional issue, Sports Australia recognised in mid-2018 that the relevant law that governed the handing out of these sports grants, that's the Australian Sports Commission Act, it required it to authorise the grants, not the minister. And it said that if the minister wanted to be the final decision maker, her office would need to seek legal advice as to whether she could, and no such legal advice was sought.
And there's also a provision in Section 11 of the same Act allowing the minister to impose additional requirements or provide directions, and there was no advice or direction under Section 11.
That's interesting. I'm just writing that down. If you'd like to talk to David Whiting, 1300 222 774 is our number. I think Rosalie in Geelong gets the first berth this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Pleasure. Go ahead.
I have a relative in suburbia who has a 1,000 square metre block with an old house which has permission to be pulled down to build a new one, and it's towards the back of the block. There's an 80-year-old elm tree in the middle of the front yard, which is to be protected, and they don't worry about that at all. The council has stipulated that there be an 18-metre diameter protective fence around this tree while the old house is removed and the new one is being built.
Yes.
So this is wider than the block and effectively encroaches on each neighbour's property as well, preventing anything or anyone entering the property.
Yes.
Can a council do this?
Well, the council has done it.
Nothing has been signed off.
Well, sorry, you make an application to council, say I want to do this, this and this.
Yes.
And council then can issue you with a planning permit or can tell you that they're thinking of issuing you with a planning permit, and if they do, it'll have these conditions. Now,
yes.
If they issue the planning permit and the condition is not satisfactory to your relative, you have the ability to go to VCAT to object to the condition.
Right.
Right. Now, but the council's view will be we want to save this tree.
Yes.
So you would need an arborist or similar to come along and provide a different strategy for protecting the tree.
Right.
Now, last year there was a house that I saw being constructed on the south side of the Heidelberg Cemetery, and my view is that the construction was within 6 feet of this mammoth tree, and there were amazing protection works around the tree. So can I suggest you start with an arborist? What do I need to do to make sure that this tree is safe, both during the demolition and the construction?
Right.
That's the process. It's if the permit's issued, then you go to VCAT to appeal the permit condition.
Right.
Are you interested in doing that? Is that how far you want to go, Rosalie?
Well, otherwise you can't do a
yes.
house, can't have a new house.
Yes?
Yes. Well, no, they can't get anything onto the block to remove or put up a new house.
Yep.
Then they have no choice. They need to. It sounds to me to be an absolutely silly condition.
And I don't know that they come out and check to see what they're doing either.
Well, I don't know. The question will be, what's an appropriate setback for the elm tree?
Yes.
And it might be that 9 metres is an appropriate setback if that's the radius.
Well, let's see what VCAT has to say. Rosalie, thank you. Patrick is in Williamstown. Good morning.
Good morning, Virginia. Good morning, David. How are you?
Well,
Very
thank you.
well.
Look, this is we got a penalty reminder notice for a parking fine in Dandenong. We never received the original notice. Now, the thing is, it was issued by the enforcement agency, Chisholm Institute of TAFE. We have never been to Dandenong, and, my wife was with me in Anglesey on the day of the purported infringement.
Yes.
And I sort of responded on this penalty reminder notice for an internal review, and I provided them a statement from me saying she was in Anglesey, proof of my ownership of the house in Anglesey, a printout from Google Maps showing we were there on the day, and some phone calls.
You've
from
got me
her.
fascinated. How could a picture from Google Maps prove you were there?
Well, it showed when we looked for the trip home, it recorded what time we left.
But
Anglesey
Patrick,
and what
it didn't
time
prove
we
the
left.
car was there.
No, it didn't put the car was there.
Yes.
That's right. But
Now, Patrick, my experience is that the enforcement agencies, not the reminder people, but the people who issue the tickets, almost invariably take photographs.
Yes, that's what I would expect. But we've asked Bartels Taylor, who are the agency trying to collect this fine,
Yes.
to provide details of the enforcement agency. Like Chisholm Institute of TAFE, if you look it up online, there's one number. It's just seemingly for students only. We can't get through to the people at the enforcement agency.
Oh, they're
who
desperate not to talk to you, Patrick. You've got to understand that. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
And look, I mean, the amount of money is only small, but in principle, we don't want to be paying something that is not yours to pay, and you wouldn't want that happening in society generally.
Patrick, my story's better than yours.
Yeah.
I got a
I
parking
didn't think it was a
ticket.
competition, but
It
anyway,
is.
go on.
It is.
All right.
I got a parking ticket in Moreland, and we chose to pay it using BPay rather than Oz Postpay. Council assumed that we hadn't paid it. So we got the courtesy letter, we reminded them we'd paid it. We got the letter from the Enforcement Authority and we reminded we'd paid it. And we actually had to go to, it was only the day before we went to court that the council was prepared to admit that I in fact received the money some 5 months earlier.
Oh, really?
So, Patrick, that's the kind of rubbish you will need to put up with.
Yeah, and if we do go to court, what would be our position? Would we?
Well, your position is that that car was not there.
No.
Right? And how many cars do you have, Patrick?
We've got 2 cars, and my wife's she's the only driver of hers, and it was locked in the secure garage in Williamstown at the time of the purported infringement.
Okay. So you just need to go and explain that to the magistrates court when you get that far. But what I do, it's going to cost you $20, but you'd like a Freedom of Information application made to the organisation that issued the ticket, and you're asking them for all documents including images that support the issue of the infringement notice.
So there is an onus on them to prove we were there.
They're prima facie. There's an evidentiary burden, and they've got the advantage. They're prima facie assumed to be correct. Okay,
Yeah.
But you're providing sufficient information to say, well, they're not correct.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it's
good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much. Much appreciated, David. Thank
No
you.
worries. Thanks for calling in. Jess is in Yarraville. Jess, you've got an interesting executor of a will challenge here.
Yes. Hi, Virginia. Hi, David.
Hello.
Thank you so much for taking my call. Look, my husband is an executor of his uncle's will, and he's executor with his auntie, his
Yes.
uncle's wife.
His uncle's wife, widow. Yes.
So he's selling off all the assets for the estate, and in one of those assets is a gun. And I said to my husband, I don't think you should sell the gun. Please just get it destroyed. But he said, no, I have a legal obligation to sell everything to get
Jess,
as
who
much
inherits
money.
everything under the will? The aunt?
His wife.
Good.
The
Then,
wife, yeah.
then the executor and your husband can reach an agreement that under which they can sell the gun.
They can.
Or alternatively,
No, but
so
you're-
the
but-
gun now belongs to the widow.
No, but I think you're saying morally you actually would rather the
Yes.
gun was destroyed and not put into the system to be sold and
That's
resold.
exactly. Or I said, if his wife wants to do it, if she wants to sell it, let her do it. But I don't feel comfortable with you selling the gun. I said, please just get it destroyed.
I'm really very sorry, Jess. Your husband
Yeah.
has promised to give effect to his uncle's will.
That's what he said.
So for you to come along and say you have a higher moral responsibility to the community at large, and therefore you can't do what your uncle wanted, means that he might want to renounce probate and say, I'm out of here, I want nothing to do with this. But isn't it really, if the whole of the estate goes to the widow, isn't
Yeah.
it really the widow's choice?
Yeah, good. That's what I said. I said, I think just discuss it with her. Because
Yeah,
she
I
might
can
feel the
understand
same.
that. I mean, depending on what it was, I might well be in favour. You also need to notify the firearms registry that.
Or it's with a gunsmith and it's like an antique.
Okay, so
gun.
it's being
It's not
okay.
like it's all.
It doesn't have there's no license that goes with it or anything.
The uncle should have had a licence. So I think it's a discussion you have with the aunt.
Yeah.
And if
good.
she's happy for it to be destroyed, I mean, if it's an antique, it might have a museum value.
Yeah.
And she might get a donation for donating it.
This
She
is
might
one of
get a
those
tax deduction
one of those
for donating
situations,
it.
David, where you get that look on your face where someone brings another dimension to the discussion, and the look on your face says, "I don't care. It's the law."
That's what my husband said.
It's an interesting. I have lots of discussions with clients, Virginia. My obligation is not to justify it. My obligation is to explain it and to see how we might address it. I'm not saying that we don't have other discussions about how
I
we might
hear you.
improve the world.
I hear you. But this discussion in particular is limited by the frame that we put around it, which
Absolutely.
is...
Jess, it's not your
advice
choice.
It's not your choice. You'll have to keep your nose out of this one. Sorry, Jess.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm looking forward to listening to you talk about the lawyers' overtime coming up.
We mentioned just before the underpayment of them. So,
Yes.
that's the issue for now, but we might revisit it. Thanks for calling in. Brad's in South Gippsland. Hello.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Virginia, and thanks, David. I've got a call. It's a bit regarding a lease of a paddock. We currently lease some Crown land that's adjacent to our property from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and we then would like to be able to adjust somebody else's horses on that property. And I'm just curious, a couple of things. One is whether or not we're able to do that. There is a clause in our lease that says something about assignment and saying that we can't assign part of that property, the property or part of it, to somebody else without written consent. And would that cover adjustment as well?
No. No, adjustment would be when you allow someone else on your land, you do it either as a lease or a licence.
Yep.
So a lease involves exclusive possession. So if you leased the paddock to me, you wouldn't have any rights of entry onto the paddock. If you granted me a licence to use the paddock, you would still have rights to access the paddock.
Okay.
So, and an adjustment arrangement is really no more than just a storage deal. Now, this will be a next week topic, Brad, but two things. Presumably, if you allow me to adjust my horse on your paddock, you're representing to me that the fences are strong enough and appropriate to keep the animal in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So that's... But look, I'll give it some thought, look at some cases and come back to you next week.
Well, and that sort of comes to, thanks, David, that sort of comes to my second part of the question, and that is if
Just
the horses
briefly.
do get out, and say we're hit by a car, is it then my responsibility as the leaser or the licenser of the paddock to maintain the fences and therefore
Brad,
I'd be liable?
that's really the next week question.
Yeah, okay.
There is some legislation. There's the Wrong Straying of Animals Act here in Victoria.
Yep.
And my recollection is it's the person who controls the animal,
Okay.
which would be the owner, right? Because you're really allowing the owner to keep his or her horse in your paddock.
Yep.
You're not taking custody of the horse.
All right, good on you. Thanks for that. Interesting comment here, David, by Simon in Donvale. Just updated. This is about the gun question.
Yes.
And the gun being destroyed rather than being sold as part of the estate. Will this caller still want the gun destroyed if it's worth $20,000? Mine is. That's why it's in my will for sale by auction, says Simon in Tonvale. And I suspect there might be an element of that. It's there in the estate because it potentially, if it's antique as she describes, a rather valuable part of the estate.
Yes. Yeah.
And someone would like a return on that rather than it being crushed.
Yeah. But again, you could make a donation at a valuation to a public authority.
But ultimately, it's all has to go through the person who benefits from the will.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got time for a quick last call from Rosemary in Sandringham. Where are you? There you are. Hi, Rosemary. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Morning to both of you. Question is, do I have any legal redress? I live in a retirement village in an apartment on the second floor. I've been here nearly 10 years. My bedroom has been wet with the storm damage 12 times in the last 10 years, twice in the last week. Do I have any legal redress to get the company to fix it? Because it's something to do with the box guttering around it.
Rosemary, you do. You will occupy the unit in the retirement village pursuant to a lease.
Yes.
And the normal proposition is that it's the landlord's problem to keep it weathertight.
Well, they've told me they fixed the roof, which they did in 2017.
But fixing the roof and fixing the box guttering are not the same.
Yes, so I could benefit from going to get some legal advice.
I would, yes.
Okay, thank you very
Pleasure.
much.
Thank you.
Good luck. Steve in Merrijick, hello.
Hi. Yeah, just a quick question. My partner's got a debt from a university in New Zealand. Dates back to the 90s. It caught up to it 3 years ago, and it's become a rather large debt. What is the powers of debt collection from an overseas country in Australia, and do they have the ability to sell the debt onto a private collector and, say, declare you bankrupt if you fault on the loan?
Well, I've got your phone number now, so I could dob you in, of course.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Merrijick's not that big. Steve,
keep talking. Will I be able to identify you in 10 minutes?
Number of elements to your call. Yep. The general proposition is that sovereign debt from another nation is not enforceable as a debt in Australia. However, we like New Zealanders so much that they have their own rules, and it's exactly the same as if it was the Commonwealth or a state debt.
That's what I thought.
So that's problem number one. She should have gone somewhere more exotic for a university education. The second element is that it is possible for the New Zealand government to sell the debt, and it can be enforced by the buyer of the debt. So it's an assignment of a book debt or a factoring arrangement.
So they're coming to get you.
So you just pay it.
Yes.
Well, no, I would give it a really good negotiation, Steve, because, you know, when they sell credit card debt, they sell it at 2 and 3 cents in the dollar. It's not 50 cents or 80 cents in the dollar.
Listen to you not saying just pay the debt. How interesting.
No, I'm saying it's an opportunity to negotiate the issue. That way lawyers make more money, Gina.
You constantly surprise me, charm me also, and surprise me. Lovely to see you, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Whiting, your talkback lawyer, thank you for all those calls.